Good evening, everyone. My name is John Tate. I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. If you have just arrived and you're looking for a chair, there are some chairs right over there, and there is an aisle in the middle, so rest assured you won't have to push your way past anybody. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, and the land on which we gather tonight is, of course, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Innuak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We're delighted to have you all here tonight on a shockingly spring-like evening here in Winnipeg. We are, of course, celebrating the launch of 2 new books in the Lyrik Poetry Series from CMU Press, the new and selected poems of John Weier, and the new and selected poems of David Waltner-Toews. Much gratitude to the indefatigable Sue Sorensen at CMU Press for helping to make this evening and these books a reality. There'll be some readings from the books from this podium, and then there'll be a conversation hosted by a wonderful poet, Sarah Ens. Following that, there'll be an opportunity for you folks to ask questions. So please do let those percolate in your brain over the course of the evening. When the Q&A time does arise, I will circulate with this microphone in a non-threatening fashion, which is not because we don't think you can project your voice. It just ensures that the good folks watching on YouTube can hear the questions. Following that, I'll be back at the end to go over signing procedure, so please look forward to that. But for now, I have the immense pleasure of introducing your host for the evening. Sarah Ens is a writer, editor, and book publicist based in Treaty 1 territory here in Winnipeg. She is the author of The World is Mostly Sky and the exceptional collection Flyway, which won the 2023 Greenlit Poetry Award. Please give a boisterous round of applause for Sarah Ens.
Well, it is my very great pleasure and privilege to introduce John Weier, who will be our first poet of the evening. John Weier has published over a dozen books, including 6 major collections of poetry. His first book of poetry, published in 1986 and launched with Sarah Clausen, I learned this evening, was called After the Revolution. Before this new and selected book of poetry, his most recent book, published in 2013, was Where Calling Birds Gather. John is past president of the League of Canadian Poets and was involved during the formative years of the literary press group, Access Copyright, and Canadian Book Information Centre. For many years a professional luthier or violin maker, he now has a career as a therapist. Known for his love of bird watching, John has logged over 3,400 species of birds. And I count myself lucky because I once had the opportunity to go on a birding expedition with John, and we saw many, many varieties of gulls, and I was unable to identify even one of them. Poet Nathan Dueck is the editor of the Lyrik Poetry Series, and he is instrumental in bringing these new and selected books by Canada's foremost Mennonite poets to life. In the introduction to John's book, Nathan writes, "A combination of candor and culpability is what makes Weir's poetry compelling. Although the poem's speakers have strong convictions and they can be contrarian on occasion, they never seem to be wholly committed to their arguments. They question others as well as themselves. Weir articulates this state of uncertainty with sensitivity, and by doing so, he invites genuine reaction." I certainly experienced this genuine response when reading through John Weir's new and selected poems. These poems, which can be conversational, confrontational, and confessional all at the same time, invite readers to seek and to question, to look and look again. Please give a warm welcome to John Weier.
Thank you, Sarah. That's the best introduction I've ever had. And hi to you all. It's great to see lots of familiar faces. Some of you I haven't seen for some time. Greetings and welcome. Before I start, I'd like to thank a few people, a few key people. Sue Sorensen, who dreamt up both the series of selected poems and also dreamt up this book. Thank you, Sue. To Nathan Dueck, who chose the poems and was a very lovely editor on the collection. Thanks, Nathan. Jonathan Dick, who designed the cover, of which I'm very fond. Chelsea Norton for publicity as we approach these events. Phil Waldner and Javier Jimenez, who I don't think are here, who did copy edits and inputting of the manuscript, so I didn't have to. Sarah Ens, of course, our gracious host. John Toews and McNally Robinson, and I think, I don't know, how many launches have I had at McNally? Probably pretty close to a dozen, I think. Margie Swetman, Barb Schott, and Sally Edel for back cover copy, without which books never sell. And of course, thanks to you all. So I'm reading a smattering of poems, some from the 90s, some from, well, most of them from this century. But certainly, I started writing in the 80s, so there are books in here. There are poems in here from the 80s. I'm starting with a couple of poems from the most recent book, Where Calling Birds Gather. This was a collection where I set myself a rule that there had to be a bird in every poem. Eventually, I took one bird out, so there's one bird somewhere, one lost bird somewhere that doesn't have a poem. Yes, so these two poems will be set in, are set in Ethiopia. And the first is kind of a very loose and prairie-like poem. In Ethiopia, I discovered when we went for a drive somewhere, it was usually cross-country. Through desert, through rivers, dried riverbeds, over mountains. There were no roads, there were sometimes ruts. Compass. Sand track. Cattle trail. Dust bowl or dried riverbed. Not an inch of tarmac, 300 kilometers. Stone corduroy. Anthology of boulders, plate of rocks across the water, not my car, not yours, Acura, BMW, wouldn't last an hour. This slash between forest on the right, fecund forest on the left, a rash of thorns. Consider the laws we live by, consider the lives we live. These ruts and cuts zagging, the sun-glazed hill, so one day heaves into another. This course between chestnut-naped and crested Franklin, at last, all these synonyms for road. The second poem, also from Ethiopia, from the same collection. If my fingers would stop shaking, I'd be able to find it. Two individuals show up, a Buddhist monk, Pema Chodron, abbot in a monastery in New Brunswick, I think. A lively author, and some of you may have read her. Am I booming too much, John?
Oh, no, I'm just.
You're gonna take a picture, all right, I'll pose.
Pretend not there.
So Pema Chodron, the one, Teilhard de Chardin, the Jesuit mystic, French philosopher of the 20th century, died in the 50s, I think. They show up in the poem along with a bird. Stone broke. Hank Williams says, lonesome whippoorwill. Dolly Parton says, loneliness found me one time too many. Elvis says, been so long on Lonely Street, and Billie Holiday traveling alone. Joni Mitchell says, am a lonely painter in a box of paints. Beatles say, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club. Text says loneliness a symptom of depression. Free online dictionary, strong feelings of emptiness, isolation. King James Bible says, I am desolate and afflicted. Says nothing about loneliness at all, though concordance squeezes it between loins and longing. Ironically, people are often loneliest in areas of heavy population, seem to have been particularly lonely this past century. Wikipedia says that Shakespeare was one of the first writers to record the word, like to a lonely dragon that his fen makes feared. Buddhist Pema Chodron says, born alone, die alone, in between also alone. Not to worry, loneliness at heart of being human. Dalai Lama says, cultivate compassion. Teilhard de Chardin says, world round like a ball, friendship round too. Parisian crow says, caw, 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 and shuffles its wings. So going back into the previous century, the only poem I read from the 90s. As you all know now, I was a luthier for some 40 years, earning my living restoring, repairing violins. And published in the 90s a collection called Violin Maker's Lament, a collection of poems based on the life of a Hungarian violin maker, Otto Erdős, with whom I studied so many years ago. Otto participated in the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, and of course fled the country in the dark across country to save his life when the communists took over again. Violins and poetry. I am a poor man. I have holes in my pockets. I have a shop full of wood and violins. I have a bag full of memories. I had hopes. I have holes in my pockets. I need to pay the mortgage and the rent. I am a poor man. I am poor as a poet. My heart swells with the ache, the thought of old places, dead friends. I sit at night and count the total of my losses. Is this poverty? I find nothing holy here. I have my honor, my honesty. I love my family, my friends. I care for violins. I don't believe in government, any government. I am a rich man. I have a shop full of empty violins. I have empty pockets. I have a memory of home and Hungary. I love Hungary, love poetry, love laughter, love sorrow, love gypsies and tears. I'm a poet praying in my prison, a craftsman tangled in his trade. I have subtracted my worth from my debt. 0 is a human number. I wish I could reach the beauty of the sky. Wish I could stretch the moon and the stars, touch the song of the bluebird, hold the scarlet of the tanager. I wish I could pour them all in my chest, my empty chest. Fill the holes of my missing children. I have holes in my pockets. I am a poor man. There were beggars before the revolution. There are beggars after the revolution. There are beggars here in Canada. I am a beggar. I have nothing left to lose. And a couple of love poems from South Africa. This is from a collection called Under the Wings of Africa. I didn't look it up, but I believe it was published somewhere around 2005, 2006. That's all I got to say about love poems. Your skin remembered the soft, round feel of it, and smell the edge of my nostrils. Your lips moist, searching, your hair on my face, on my chest, and your fingernails deep and burrowed in my arms, your legs astraddle. beginning to quiver, and your cry, now, my cry, she's gone. You said once this absence would represent a test. I said some cross-examination, ordeal by fire, a holy cataclysm. But if I still breathe on your return, if this conflagration still blazes in my breast, tell me, have I won or have I lost? And tell me this, how did you earn the right to judge me? Thunderbird 4, dark morning. Black clouds in the pouring rain. Against my skin, rain-soaked clothes and skin, just sanding there under the monkey thorn with thunder. The stink of lightning, my burning skin and crying, my head saying, she's gone, she packed her bag, she stepped on the bus, she's traveling, or one of those big black clouds opened and swallowed her. She turned up the sound and the music took her. Gone, she's gone. And then, from a collection of new poems I'm working on now, all working around the notion of refuge. The first, a Manitoba Prairie poem. You all know those crazy -30 days. We had a whole bunch of them this year. And you've all wondered, I'm sure, about the snowy owls along the side of the road. Snowblind, far-flung and brazen prairie after a lengthy bone-deep snowfall. It's into the -30 today's, wind and snow sweeping across fields, straddling roads, skittering through ditches. And probably you shouldn't be out in these crazy temps, but you are. You're fit enough and dressed for winter. It wouldn't hurt if you had to walk a mile or two, the cars repaired, well equipped to travel dirt and gravel back roads, these almost prairie roads. And you can't resist the faint haze of woodlot in the distance. The farmhouse snuggled in its sheltered row of trees, caduous and conifer, the snowy lump of feathers hunkered on the 5th post of pasture there in the east-west line, owl in an ivy bush. Cannot resist the centuries of tall grass waving, dreaming, or the thought of Bob who used to come this way on blustery afternoons. And who could refuse the cold, the wind, the snow, the open space? Who could resist this home, this wild and joyful home, this prairie? One more poem. About a decade ago, I spent my Christmas and New Year's at sea. And in early January, crossed the Drake Passage between Tierra del Fuego and the Antarctic Peninsula. It was a terrifying and stormy night, and I thought it would be my last, seriously. It wasn't, as you can see. Sea lions gambol. And waking mid-morning to stone silence, rush upstairs and onto promenade to find ship stopped along Antarctic shores. Find southern sea smooth as window glass and brilliant blue sky, sun and glaciers glare against towering black rock face, the backdrop. And here, 100 meters distant, orcas, 10, 11, blow and breach and break the sea surface, while Adelie and macaroni penguins float by on lumps and slabs and chunks of ice, or burst like popcorn from ocean. One brown skua sails astern. Playground for petrels and prions, seals and sea lions, for black-browed albatross, not to mention krill, this saltwater sanctuary, pelagic paradise, humpback heaven. And here, 100 meters distant, orcas, 10, 11, blow and breach and break the sea, while the deli and macaroni penguins float by on lumps and slabs and chunks of ice, or pop like popcorn, burst like popcorn from the ocean. One brown skua sails astern, playground for petrels and prions, seals and sea lions for black-browed albatross, not to mention krill, this saltwater sanctuary, pelagic paradise, humpback heaven, amen.
Thank you, John. I love that poem about the -30 winter. And a few weeks ago when I read it and it was -30 and I was unable to leave the house, I thought I have to be like John Weier and go find an owl. I now have the honor of introducing our second poet of the evening. David Waltner-Toews is Professor Emeritus at University of Guelph and founding president of Veterinarians Without Borders Canada. In 2022, he was appointed an Officer of the Order of Canada. His poetry titles include The Gravity of Love, The Complete Tanta Tina, and The Impossible Uprooting. David has also written a number of nonfiction books, including The Origin of Feces, Eat the Beatles, On Pandemics, just a cheery bunch of poems or books, and a memoir called A Conspiracy of Chickens. In his introduction to David's book, Nathan Dueck writes, "Love isn't found in things so much as in the interpretation of things. Things can convey affection or charity, but natural love prospers through care and attention." When I read David's poems, I feel like I am receiving lessons in how to pay attention, how to stay with the subject, examining it from all angles and drawing nearer until some relationship or revelation surfaces, whether the subject is a mango or an onion, a white pine or a snow fort, a daughter, a father, a grandmother, or a Tanta Tina with something to say to Margaret Thatcher. Please give a warm welcome to David Waltner-Toews.
Well, these are labeled, these waters, so that
I think I drink for the right one.
you did, yeah. I could switch them. I do want a shell game now, right? Okay, it's been a long time since I've done one of these. Thank you so much to everyone who made this possible, to you, Sarah, to Sue Sorensen. It's not very often, in fact, it's never, that I would get a letter from a publisher saying, would you like to publish a collection of something with us? I'm like, really? Like, you're asking me? I spent my whole life trying to get stuff published and suddenly somebody writes. So that was wonderful. And also Nathan, the selection of the poems, that I had to let go at a certain point because he organized it differently than I would organize it. He picked different poems. He saw themes that I didn't know I was writing about, and that's wonderful. I had to re-examine my whole life, the meaning of my life, what I've done, all of these kinds of things. Thanks, Nathan, for that. And I need to contractually, actually, thank the Writers' Union of Canada and their National Public Readings Program and the Canada Council for the Arts, who made it possible for me to come all the way from Ontario to come back to this place where I was born. First lived here for the first 19 years of my life. I'm going to set my timer because I promised the National Public Readings Program that I have to read at least 15 minutes. So that if I go over 15 minutes, then I can just stop in the middle of poems. So the thing is that Nathan found in the poems, and other people apparently have as well. I was reading on the plane on the way over here a new edition of Ian Rankin's first book, The Flood. And he talked about being in the back of a class and students were finding all kinds of stuff he never knew was in his book. And he thought it was wonderful. And he quoted a literary theorist, who I don't know literary theorists very well, but what readers see in books that is important, what readers see in books is important, not what the writers intended them to see. Apparently there's a name for this. It's called reader response criticism. Okay, I'll accept that. So trying to pick poems was a bit of a challenge, and I didn't do it in a particular order, but I tried to pick poems for which the context seemed to be important. And the first one I'm reading is Death of a Humanist. I had flown from Nairobi, where I was doing some veterinary work, and I flew to Milan, Italy, and then drove up into the mountains for a workshop on complexity, which was being organized by a friend and colleague who is a nutritionist, and it was being partly paid for by Department of Agriculture, and it included a very eclectic group of philosophers and other kinds of people. And it eventually became the founding meeting of a group we called the Dirk Gently Gang. If you don't know Douglas Adams, Dirk Gently's holistic detective agency, the detective methods are based on the interconnectedness of everything, right? So we decided we were going to try to solve the interconnectedness of everything, and one of the people there wanted to have a manifesto that never. How do you do a manifesto on how everything is all mixed up with everything else? It never happened. In any case, this is one of the poems that came out of that. It's called The Death of a Humanist, which has some reflections to other poets. In the chapel of La Foloria Convent, Cortina, Italy, I meditate in the quiet dawn, a shadow of habits supplicating behind me. Before me, the silhouette of a cross, stark against the white mountain and the Aryan blue sky. Later, I climb a well-groomed mountain path through the congregation of trees. At the top, there's a chapel, a guest house, a large military gun. Up there, the sheer delight of Earth's power, barely constrained, rolls like an organ fugue down, away from me, into a complex canon of trills and rocks and breathtaking valleys, up, billowing like a ragged wind-blown sheet into the vaulted skies. It tugs at every peak against the slipping grip of guest house, chapel, gun. Below, in Milan, I walk the narrow streets, feeling at home, pause in the courtyard of the Giuseppe Verdi Music Conservatory in the Chiesa della Passione. Violin sounds dip and swing from balconies. Musicians in formal attire pace gracefully, humming around a corner. The Duomo rises in the central plaza. From a distance, like an intricate, wet-dripped sandcastle. Up close, it is a rock heap of men on horses, torsos rippling, biceps bulging in triumph and misery, swords, flags, crosses upthrust in victory. For a millennium, these bodies chopped, hauled, reorganized, reshaped wood, stone, earth, cut and slashed each other over differences of opinion, convinced each other with argument, praised God, made God redundant with thumbscrews, racks, irons, stakes, proved that people were superior to God in all these things. Carved the Duomo in stone dragged down from the Dolomites, rebuilt the mountains in our own image, until wild snow, rock canyons, fearsome beast were transformed to cathedral, sewer, hospital, factory, guest house, gun. I sit at the edge of the plaza, security helicopters buzzing overhead, brilliant lights inflaming the magnificence of stone, eating pizza, drinking red wine. I sense the full weight of it, the mass of flesh screaming through the centuries, raining down on me, arms, legs, bodies of knowledge, corporate legacies, like a legion of mad prions remaking the earth in our image, demanding rights, attention, liberty, trampling every living thing in pursuit of truth, beauty, and efficient management. I close my eyes, recalling the small, dusky space where Leonardo depicted a gathering of 12 men arguing during a meal, one lost in sadness, seeing too far ahead. I imagine the possibility of unprovoked, unexplained acts of wildness and love, animals escaping, unfinished business, finished business undone, half-fallen cathedrals of whir with the happy chat and clicks of swallows and bats, and scattered showers of light. Something brushes my cheek in the dark, gently. A small, dry, green hand, the touch of a wild and fragile thought, lost in the midst of all this order, like a friend remembered, reaching out from between the cracks in an aqueduct or a cathedral, touching to reach me. I open my eyes, a wind sweeps across the plaza, the lights go out, unsure lovers huddle slowly past. I feel something like hope. I hold it gently, feel it scrabble and nip in the chambers of my heart, like a small bird or a mouse caught in the garden shed. I let it go free in the dusk. I should have said that the only sponsor my friend was able to get for that workshop was a vintner, who was happy to provide us with many cases of red Italian wine to talk about complexity. I don't know if that would happen in Canada, but it sure worked there. That was wonderful. The poetry of work. My work has been, to this point, has been very eclectic. It's not going to get any less eclectic as I get older, but it is now. The poetry of work. 10 years later, it is possible to write poetry about the worst of jobs. Of that job in the sawmill, only the scenery remains. Waxed cold 2x4s clamming on my palms, the roughness and perfume of cedar, old calf leather aprons, smoke signals from a plastic thermos cup. And I can't recall how the jackhammer vandalized my eardrums that summer I worked concrete. I remember sleeping well at night. When I belabored layouts for a small religious publisher, I was so tight with angry prophecies, all gone now. It snowed heavily that year, our first of marriage. We were a beast of fur and flesh, snorkeling in disturbed hibernation. The cow I am examining is a created beast, dependent on others for her livelihood. She is a milk production quota that never quite meets itself. She is a metaphor for the farmer who is dependent on a multinational corporation. The farmer is symbolic of all men, and the corporation is a Calvinistic god that is a metaphor for a graven image. Even that illusion fails. The dark barn I stand in has no running water and no electricity. I have my hand in the cow's rectum. In another 10 years, I may find this poetic. That poem was written well after 10 years of that, being in that barn in rural Saskatchewan. Page 56 here, the time of our lives. See, when I would have, if I would have selected poems, I would have selected poems I think that either were a turning point in my life, like the meeting in Cortina, where I went from being a veterinarian with a hand up a cow's butt to trying to think of, keep asking why. I told my students, stay 5 years old, just keep asking why. Was the animal sick? Why? Didn't eat right? Why? Farmer couldn't have the money? Why? And that eventually led me into God knows where. I don't know where I am anymore. Okay, where am I here? I am at the time of our lives. Periodically, my wife and the animals have kept me grounded as my brain goes off in all directions. I am having the time of my life digging up an old pine stump with my daughter in the bright fall sunshine. Everything I need to know about life and death is in this moment. The spade is singing among the white-collared mushrooms. Praise to the fungi imperfecti, the fusaria and the cladospores. The hatchet chops a tune into the wood's soft heart. Praise to the woodlice, the earthworms, millipedes, hister beetles, common black ground beetles, the slugs like ushers waving their antennae at the calamitous light spill. Please close the door. The show's in progress. Praise to the unseen saints of Gaia, the bacilli, the clostridia, and the pearly micrococci. Praise to the myriad of unseen crawlies, the forgotten ones, the bond breakers, hewers of cellulose, who make possible this uprooting. After so many years, a friend becomes part of you, where the roots begin and the earth ends, where pleasure, where pain, where wishful memory or truth cannot be dissected. No point in spading here. It is I myself who would be uprooted if I uprooted you. Time is an arrow only in the briefest bug life fragments and at the meteoric limits of our growth. Where we live, time is an inchworm, rhythms of seasons and spades, roots broken and resprung. The stump is lifting under the pry of my spade. A mouth opens below, a dark mouth, singing soft, fleshy things, singing multi-footed messengers, singing a leader of cycles. The carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the water, the sulfur, singing of the microscopic fixers, singing lustily with full synthesizer backup in chlorophyllic warbles, who make me, hominis imperfecti, possible, and you, and our sons, and our daughters, and brightly in the blue, sharp sunshine as the roots lift free, I am dug in, rooted, earthworms, beetles, fungi, bacilli all around me, skittling up the spade handle toward me, singing, welcome home, your turn is next. How are we doing for time here? I still have time. Somebody will tell me. How to love Toronto with a dead raccoon. The person I wrote it for really loved it. He's a good friend of mine. He was a wildlife pathologist that I worked with. There was a period of time, every once in a while, I like to go back and write very strict form poetry as a kind of hand exercises, like for the piano, learning how to do scales and things. One whole summer I wrote sonnets. For a period of time, I wrote villanelles and terzinelles, which are a tighter version of a villanelle. But so this was about a dead raccoon, and the context is in the 1980s when I started teaching, the late 1980s when I started teaching at the vet school in Guelph. There were somewhere around 2,000 cases of rabies in wildlife in Ontario a year. Most of them fox strain. The foxes had come down from the north. There were some raccoon strains that had come up from the south. At the same time, there was an outbreak near the Georgia-Florida border in raccoon strain. It's a separate strain of rabies that can be detected in the laboratory. During the 1980s and 90s, there was a very successful program of rabies reduction and trying to get the rabies level down. It's probably the most successful public health program that Canada's ever had, and it was run by the Department of Wildlife. What they did was they did oral vaccinations to foxes. Turns out foxes don't have an anti-vaxxer movement. They just, as long as you bait it right, you give it the right flavors, and they would sprinkle them around on the ground, or they would drop them from airplanes. And within a few years, they had the rabies level in wildlife in Ontario down to a few dozen cases, less than 100 most years. And they knew that the foxes had picked them up because they put tetracycline in, and anybody that knows that have had kids, if you give them tetracycline, you get bands on the teeth where the tetracycline shows up. It gets into with the calcium. So what happened in the meantime, we got our rabies down, and in the United States, as it happens sometimes in the United States, a bunch of hunters in the Florida area decided to fill up a truck with all the raccoons they could catch and truck them up to upstate New York where they could shoot them, because there weren't enough raccoons to shoot in upstate New York, apparently. And they let them go, and of course there was rabies among those raccoons that they let go, and they got up to the Canada-US border, and then we've had massive programs of trap, vaccinate, release. You don't want to kill the animals because then other animals will just come in and start fighting all over again. So what you want to do is get the population vaccinated, but not create vacuums where the younger ones come in and start fighting. So that's where this poem came from. And being a wildlife pathologist, Bruce, he taught us really well how to do a good postmortem on a raccoon. That's 15 minutes. So maybe I'll just let that one go. No. Keep your scalpel steady, your wits keen, don double gloves, white coat, a mask, brush gently down the fur, look well, cut clean, but not before nose, eyes, ears, anus, bones are checked for oddities. Lesions from life now past. To keep your scalpel steady, wits on edge, lean over while you check for foot pad mutilation of the kind induced by what? Your diagnostic task, down brushing fur, looking and cutting clean, will take you on a journey down through skin, through sternum, to the heart, lungs, liver, guts, and last, not least, your scalpel and your wits still keen, you cut the bony lid away to see the brain. And now, inside your head, think of the map. Brush gently down the fur, cut clean. Remember how the rabies epidemic came in trucks and woods, the city's fate in landscape cast. So steady scalpel, wits and love for life still keen, brush gently down the fur, look well, cut clean. Can I do one more? Just, I'll do one, How the Earth Loves You. Not all these poems about dying, but it's a different way of dying. How the Earth Loves You. One day, perhaps when you are in your 40s, he is at your door with a spring of daffodils. Another day he bears lilies or dagonetbulbs. Every day a flutter of fresh petals and another scent whispering at the skirt of your hair. He seems disconcertingly traditional. He brings roses, for instance, red ones. You are bemused. You look past him sheepishly to the shapes of clouds, to the paling blue sky. When your eyes return from flight, you see your hand is bleeding. You are clutching a sprig of thorns, and he is gone. He returns with fat red tomatoes, waxy green peppers, a peach pressed firmly, gently from his palm to yours. You can still feel the scars from his roses. Your hand retreats, your fingers brush, your breath like a wave curls under, tumbles, pulls back, your belly tenses. You are surfing, barely skimming the sand, an unspeakable fear swelling your tongue. Do not speak it. This is what you were made for. The heat of his gaze on your forearm, burning your cheek. You feel the slack first in your knees, then your back. Do not succumb. The best is still to come. In the fall, he leaves in a glorious swirl of gold and rust amid the chatty travel songs of migrating birds. You ache in his absence, raking at the unreachable pain in your chest. When you think of him, you balk at his easy certainty, his knowledge of your desire. You delight in the melting snowflakes that catch in his hair. You sigh at how his breathing undulates under the white quilt. It is enough to lie in bed on a slow Saturday to know he will come, his cool palm stroking your belly, your breasts, unexpectedly clutching your breath as if it were another bouquet. Do not hasten his wooing. He will come soon enough. You must not speak his name. Only when you slip life's pearls through your fingers, like a rosary, counting the day after day of his unfailing courtship, when you have ached for him in all the little things, and how you walk, how your fingers probe a place for seeds, how your cheek presses to his hard belly, how you touch the mound where new life stirs, only then will you be ready. The light will break through and the darkness together, and you will understand, finally, who it is who has loved you all this time so well. So.
Yeah, I guess you.
Feel free to just skip the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you. That was a wonderful reading. It's such one of the joys of these kinds of books are getting an overview or to get to take in the scope of a lifetime of work, and getting to hear snippets of that this evening was really wonderful. I wanted to ask you a little bit about I know, David, you touched on this, but the process of putting a book like this together, and what that experience was like, and how you went about selecting the poems, or what that felt like.
David?
Sure, David, why don't you go first?
It's from when I started writing books of poetry and getting them published. My first one was, I think, with CMU Press. One of my issues was I write poems occasionally. I write them for various circumstances and contexts, and I rarely start with a theme. I mean, but I run into people who say, well, your next book, so what's the theme of your next book? I'm like, I have no idea. And so I write during different periods of my life when I'm doing different kinds of things, and then in retrospect, I could sort of see certain themes, but Nathan saw other themes and started pulling it together. I thought, oh, that's interesting. I never thought of it that way. So I had tried myself to put together a selected, and it was hodgepodge. It was not like this, because it was poems that were emotionally close to me, that would maybe get me crying at the mic, which is not a good thing at a poetry reading. Anyway, so it's been an interesting process, and I kind of let go of it quite a bit. I think there was one poem I had a little bit of quarrel with Nathan, and that was simply because I never felt comfortable with its structure. There were some words there, and I tried replacing some of the words, and it never worked. And I said, we'll just leave that one out. But apart from that, this was fairly easy to put, because it wasn't me trying to assemble my life, which would be impossible. It's like dumpster diving and pulling up things, saying, wow, I get that. I'd rather have somebody else do the dumpster diving and organize it, you know? Right. So I was, anyway, that was my experience. I don't know what you were talking.
Yeah, I was very curious about that before I met Nathan. When I did meet Nathan, although I can't remember actually whether we discussed this by email or whether we did it in person, probably by email, didn't we, Sue? So I actually, in my first email to Nathan, I said, well, you're the editor of the book, so this is your book.
Yeah.
You can have it. And that meant I didn't have to make any choices. And that meant I didn't have to read over all my work. I mean, it's hard to read old work, right? It's old work, and sometimes you feel okay about it, but sometimes you don't. So I told Nathan it was his book. He could make all that, whatever choices he wanted. And then, of course, when he sent me the choices, then it wasn't quite so simple.
Not his book anymore.
Although I actually, I didn't object to any of the poems he'd chosen. But for each of my collections, I asked to have one choice from each book that I could include, right? And so that's what we did. That's how it came out. We also, very early on, I asked him about editing. Was I allowed to edit my poems?
Yeah.
He said he told me some story about a British poet who had literally totally revamped all his poems for his selected. I didn't want to do that. But we agreed that I would be able to, that I would be allowed, or that it was okay to do sort of, you know, word edits and maybe some line break. So minor edits, so the poem still looked the same on the page. That was
you can't tell.
Sneaky, huh? So that's how it went. It was very easy.
Yeah.
In the end.
Well, Nathan Dueck is very talented. If this was an easy process, then that's kudos to him.
Yeah, he did a good job.
Yeah. So I think, looking at the time, I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time for audience questions. So it's up to you. I'm going to put it to you. Do you want a question on eco-poetry or Mennonite stuff?
I'll stick with eco. He can do the Mennonite. I haven't identified as Mennonite for a lot of decades.
when I had never written anything with the word Mennonite in it until I was 30 years old, and I was in Grand Prairie, Alberta.
I still have.
So I wrote a few poems and I sent them in, and they were published in a magazine published in Toronto. And they illustrated it with people with big black hats and with horses and buggies. And I thought, they don't have a clue, not a clue. And then I had this whole shtick where in the 90s where I found it difficult for a white male to talk about certain things. I thought I'd put on a dress, put on a kerchief, I can say whatever I want. So that was, let's not talk about
What was the question?
let's talk about the ecos.
In our emails, yeah, you both did vehemently deny that you were Mennonite. So,
Well, curiously, I mean, certainly I grew up Mennonite, and but literally from 25 to
yeah.
65, I didn't check into the Mennonite world, except when I went home for Christmas. And actually, I think, Sue, you're probably the first one ever to have identified me as a Mennonite writer. Thanks a lot.
Okay, but let's go eco poetry then.
At the age of 19, I got out of high school and I went overland to Montreal, and I freighted to Europe, and I went overland Europe, Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan. And when I came back, I was a complete nihilist. I didn't believe anything. It was total blackness. And I ended up, for a whole variety of reasons, going to a place called Goshen College, where I found two profs, Mary Weier, who was a music prof, and Mary Ellen Bender, who taught 20th century literature. And this is the first time I had ever come across people who I identified as Mennonites who asked any questions. You can ask anything, and the answers were open-ended. And to me, it was a way of kind of sort of creeping back toward that, rescuing what I could. And then, of course, I had the fate to move to Waterloo, where Hildy Thiessen, Hildy Fraze, whom I grew up with, we met at the skating rink at 12 years old in Bronx Park. And she was there, and she's organizing these conferences, and David, you've got to do this, and so on. She's an old friend. So that's the level of Mennonite. I've stayed on all the arguments. My mother kept sending me the MB Herald until my wife had to hide them before I could read them, because I get so angry and upset. I can't let David read this stuff, because he'll just start yelling at everything. And so she would have to steal it and throw it in the garbage before I got a hold of it. So
now to Eagle Bush.
Yes, please.
Good. I'm glad I asked. So both of you, the subject of the natural world or other than human life is central to your work. And something I love about it. I had identified a moment, John, in one of your new poems, 1.2 Cradle Song, talking about following a woodpecker in the woods. And you say, you write, a feeling of homecoming, a chickadee lights in the buckthorn beside you, looks at you then for a moment. For one moment you think that one thought about the future, dying thought, and not at all sorrowful, it turns out. Then the chickadee flits to your shoulder, feathers on your shoulder. And I love that moment. And David, you have your poem Trees, where you write about trees in 3 different instances. The first is the sawmill, where you can't bring yourself to saw down the trees, and you tell yourself, they're just trees after all, this is not family. Later on in the Niagara Escarpment, the speaker of the poem says, I cannot get enough of walking among the trees, their thoughtless, perfect love that holds and lets me go. So both of you, I mean, in this time of climate catastrophe, these are the kinds of poems that help to sort of ground me and help me know how to respond. But I wanted to hear what you both have to say about nature writing, or what your aim is when you're writing about other than human life.
Can I move?
Go ahead.
So on the paper, your question starts with eco writing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. But the curious thing is that though I care deeply about the environment and I'm really concerned about environmental issues and try to live by that, right? At the same time, I don't think of my writing as eco-writing. I think of it as love writing, right? So, so like, why do I write about nature? It's because, like, if I want to feel wonder, if I want to feel beauty, awe, well, I just go for a drive and leave the city, right? So it's really, what is it that I love? It's trees and, you know, weeds and prairie and -30, and, right? Yeah, so I love weather, I love trees, I love being out in that world, and so I'm really just writing love poems rather than eco poems. Yeah, that's what about this for me. And I mean, you know, reading Flyway, I don't have a sense you're writing eco poems, you're writing love poems too. It's really same thing. That's where I am.
Yeah, and I concur with that as well. I mean, I went through this whole thing of being a veterinarian, where you look at animals from the outside. And then at some point, I started thinking about kinship with other species. And then, so this is my family. So what does that even mean? And it becomes, it's complex, it's complicated, this relationship. It's a kind, it is love, but it's self-love, and it's love of all of these living things around me, and they're coming up the spade handle where I'm digging a hole, and I'm going to be next. I'll be joining the family there, you know, and it's, so it's that kind of a thing, rather than I don't find eco poetry in that broad sense where you're trying to make a point. For me, it's trying to find a home. You know, how do I fit into all of this?
It's relational.
Yeah, it's relational. It's all relational.
I remember reading Emily Carr's memoir, or she kept diaries, right? And I remember reading her diaries back in, what was it, the 80s? And she was sort of into ranting in her diaries. But anyway, one of her rants was that the people in her community thought she was not religious. They thought she was. And she, in the diary, she said, "The truth is, I am religious. I worship trees." I get that.
And that's, you know, for me, going back, growing up in the city, I was a true believer, and my early poems were rants. They were, you know, like this, judgmental, and that's it's one of the reasons I had to get out of here, to get away from that, to rediscover something that wasn't that I wasn't just so angry about, and finding that home somehow. It's a lifelong journey. I had to write books about shit and beetles and all kinds of stuff in between, and discover, you know, how do we relate ethically to beetles and insects, and what does that mean? You know, you can't look them in the eye like you can a dog. That's easier, but beetles and birds, they kind of look at you a little bit, but they don't really care. I don't think. I don't know. So it's that's one of the reasons that some of the early poetry, I'm glad it wasn't.
You're glad Nathan didn't choose.
Yeah, I'm glad Nathan. I would have cut this.
Well, both of these books, I think, do. You can feel that sense of home and the looking for home and creating home, and through relationships and through kinship with other species, and they're great books, folks. I think John might let us have one audience question, so one special person might get to ask a question.
Does anyone have a burning question?
Oh, I'm the special person. I have a birdie question. So you had mentioned that, when you need to reconnect, you jump in the car and you go to a natural place of where there's other life. And then you were saying that it's relational and that we have to find an ethical way of relating to other life. And what strikes me is that we've created environments where it's either humans or it is natural environments. And somehow they are meant to be different. And then we sort of self-flagellate that humans are so destructive. But I think somehow we're letting that's a bit of a cop-out because humans aren't inherently destructive. We don't have to be like that. We don't have to build environments like that. But it's sort of like a duality that we have created and now sort of feel guilty about. So why are we like that? And have you run across any good antidotes?
I don't go for drives, I go for long walks, along abandoned railroad tracks and things like that. And maybe it's partly because I learned to focus down on bugs and those kind of things, because I look at the life around. And yeah, it's you're right, we're not inherently destructive, but and there's always these contradictions in what we do, right? We're trying to do something positive and then there are all these unintended consequences, and just trying to pay attention to that. And one of the things that I've really emphasized for myself is something Oliver Sacks said, and that is we need to cultivate our peripheral vision, things that's just at the edges, whether an urban environment or rural environments. He's talking about science and scholarship. We've learned to focus what's right in front of us, and that can be good, but for seeing this, having this peripheral vision, which means listening to other people, other animals, those kind of things, which things that fit in and out of our peripheral vision. That's kind of where I've learned to go. I don't know. With that, it's not really an answer. You got a better answer?
No, but I mean, I think we aren't necessarily naturally destructive, and yet it sure appears that we've become that. But I think the difficulty is that we like habits. We live by habit, right? Even our brains like established neural pathways, right? And so that's what we have to break. We have to break the habit, I think.
And COVID helped that. When I turned 70, my wife bought me 7 chickens for my 70th birthday, which was illegal in the city where we were, but she didn't look at the bylaw. But I learned how to pay attention to the hawks and the foxes and all the other animals that were around there, some of which got their meal out of our backyard. And those kinds of things that I hadn't noticed before. I lived in this town, that backyard, but never noticed all of those things. And during COVID, everybody slowed down. Foxes were running around on the streets, and it really helped to change habits. Not all for the good, but a lot of them, it got people out of the old routines, and you have to, what are we going to do now? Can't go back to that normal. What's happening now? And I think it's open-ended. And it's open to abuse, as we've seen, for people. Oh, here's an opportunity for us, right? And we jumped in, but there's been a lot of good things come out of that. So. And the next one, I mean, bird flu is going to come through if we don't obey the last pandemic. This next one, when I think of God, I think of God in all things. Everything is God it's in me, and it's in all the other species. And if we don't pay attention, well, there'll be another pandemic to say. Here's another message. You missed the last one, right?
Well, on that cheery note.
Yay, pandemic.
I do think, these poetry is also a good way to break out of your habits. Poems are about, reworking some of those neural pathways, I think. So I think now it's time to say goodbye and time to sign.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you so much, yeah.
First of all, I'm going to make you applaud for them at the end as well, but please do applaud for everyone else. Thank you all for your words and your thoughts. Thank you, Sarah, for corralling our poets so incredibly efficiently this evening. And thank you all for your attention and your question. I realize we made it to the end of the event without actually pointing out that it is World Poetry Day this very evening, which seems churlish in front of a room full of poets. So let me acknowledge that and also say that there's no better way to celebrate than by actually listening to poetry, celebrating it, and thinking about it as we have done this evening. So thank you all for being here for that tonight. We will be moving along to the signing portion of the evening, so in just a moment we'll be relocating David and John to these chairs here. There'll be a moment of beautiful chaos while some people get in line and some people mosey out, so please, it will actually all straighten out. It'll be much more straightforward in just a sec. Please do feel free to come up and have a copy of either or both. We recommend both books signed. You can get them signed before you pay for them, just please do remember to pay for the books. We would really appreciate that. And this is also not the extent of it, so I will refill our piles throughout the evening. It would also be churlish of me not to mention that Sarah Ens will be back here to read her own wonderful poetry on April 12th, where she will be reading with Tia Gerbeza, a wonderful poet from Saskatchewan. It was a new collection, How I Bend Into Moors. Please do come out for that. And for now, please join me in thanking CMU Press, David Waltner-Toews, Joan Weier, and Sarah Ens. Have a wonderful night, everyone.